Well, hello, and thank you for joining me today. We're going to have a great time talking about staying safe. And we're brought here today thanks to an amazing grant through the Washington State Micro Enterprise Association and the Pacific County Economic Development Council that you can see right here amongst the other logos of all the groups that benefited from this wonderful grant. The purpose of these grants was to extend business training programs and technical assistance to very small businesses throughout our areas like the peninsula here that are rural and need some assistance. So thanks to the WSMA and the Pacific County Economic Development Council for bringing me here today. My name, and don't forget, the Economic Development Council is here to support you as a local business. In addition to these services you see here, like new business startup assistance, which I've been blessed to benefit greatly from. They offer things like printing, referrals for things like graphic design and accounting and social media support. And they have an office center available with a meeting room. So take a look if you have not already at all of the benefits that are available there. So I am Lynn Westfall. My business and pseudonym is The Modem Lisa and has been since way back in the 1999 era. I was a class of 2000 graduate, but lucky enough to benefit from working from my high school the last 2 years on supporting all of their technology. And that was really my first introduction to a lot of these cybersecurity concepts because I was responsible for deploying a lot of the early software that was used to protect the school's PCs and Macs and network equipment. So, I got to install things like VPN and firewall and got very comfortable with names like McAfee and Norton and all the different security suites out there. And then, throughout my career, while I may not have been directly in a cybersecurity role, my career kind of always tiptoed around it. I've done a lot with graphic design, web design, and general business support, which always involves a high level of security. But I've also done IT procurement and asset management and the elements of securing the things that you buy for your business and the things you need to run your business has always been a part of that process. So I'm happy to be able to share all of this knowledge with you today. So, what will we talk about? We're going to understand the risks that you face as a business owner, business leader, entrepreneur, solopreneur like myself. What potential risks are out there for your business and how are they unique to your company and how your company operates? Because not every threat is applicable to every business, but every business has applicable threats. So you want to know what potential threats are applicable to your business and the different processes, software, and tools that you employ so that you can protect yourself. We're going to learn about security options, including multi-factor authentication or MFA. And I know this can be a thorn in some people's side, but we're going to talk about why it's so important to implement multiple layers of security and why MFA is so important in today's world. I'm going to help you to develop your own incident response plan, or at least the shell outline of what that might mean. And I've given you in the email a spreadsheet that is sort of a template for this, and we'll go over that when we get to that section of today's class. We'll learn about maintaining software security because this is where many of the threats to your technology assets and the rest of your business are coming from. So we'll talk about why it's so important to install those updates as they come into play and some tips for how you can better understand that threat landscape. And then we'll just touch a little bit on enabling remote work environments. Here on the peninsula, it can be hard to get the right staff for your needs. So you may need to allow for remote work from other locations. And we're going to talk about how you can do that safely and make sure that it's an efficient process for anyone that you need to work remotely. Maybe it's you that needs to be able to access things remotely for your business, and you need to make that as secure as possible. I'll help you to understand how to do that. Now, we had a little poll on the entry of class today, and let's talk about those questions and why they're going to relate to our topic so near and dear today. So, how recently have you updated your email password? And for most of us, this can be more than 6 months. Luckily, a lot of software out there today is prompting us to update those passwords more regularly, even requiring us to update them more regularly. But if you're responsible for setting up the software systems, email access, and other confidential access processes, and you're not putting a timeout on those passwords of your accessible users, this is a time to consider it because it's not necessarily on the top of everyone's mind to go and keep those passwords updated. But it is spring and spring cleaning. We should be updating our passwords. We'll talk a lot more about passwords. So, and I ask next if you use a password manager because those can be very helpful, almost game changers for businesses. I was responsible for managing the LastPass environment in my last corporate job, and it really brought efficiency to our department in many ways. And we'll talk about how, not only for managing passwords, but other secure data that you have to share amongst your organization. So I asked if you use Gmail as your primary business email because I'm going to show you how you enable two-factor authentication for Gmail because it is so commonly used amongst the businesses and business owners here on the peninsula. I wanted to make sure that I touched on that. And really, as small businesses are tiptoeing their way into technology, having a Gmail account can be pretty common. So I want to make sure we cover that. But of course, then there's Microsoft 365. And many of us utilize Microsoft 365 not necessarily as our email provider, meaning we don't have an Outlook.com, an MSN.com email that Microsoft actually provides, but we utilize Outlook and OneDrive and other Microsoft products, and those are tightly connected with our email, and obviously it's housing documents in the cloud. So we want to understand security for that. So I wanted to see how many of us might be utilizing that suite as part of our regular business processes. Have you ever had unauthorized access to one of your emails, accounts, or services? A lot of us have. It's about 60% of the population that has experienced some kind of unauthorized access. And this is growing as more of us become interconnected and utilizing more and more accounts. There's more and more threat landscape to manage. So it's more likely that if you are one of the few that have not been attacked at any point yet, that you will be in the future. And I can show you a website that will show you if you have been attacked and your email is available on the dark web and maybe you don't know about it. And then I asked some simple questions. Do you have employees? Do you have a physical location? For those of us that are solopreneurs out here, it's a little less to manage. But if you have even one employee, the layers of sophistication of security you need to add on can grow exponentially. And having a physical location means physical security. And while technology can be really helpful for that physical security, it also means maintaining it and understanding how that technology also needs to be maintained in order to keep your physical security secure. So we've already had 3 classes in this series, and we've been opening doors basically, just like you unlock your doors and windows, to keep intruders out in the digital world. All of these applications that we've talked about, utilizing communications platforms like Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, these all need to be secured and locked, just like our doors. And maybe we need cameras on them. We need monitoring on some of these services to make sure that there aren't ongoing threats. When it comes to the second class in our online presence, we have to take a more offensive stand, defensive stance, pardon me. Whereas there's a lot of defense in cybersecurity that we'll talk about. A more offensive stance can be that monitoring and alerting to try to understand what's going on in real time. And all of those systems that we talked about in our last session, HR, inventory, and customer relations management, the data within those systems is highly sensitive in many cases and requires that extra vigilance in order to ensure that that data is as secure as possible. Because ultimately, you don't want to be the one that's liable for a loss of any of your critical data, but more importantly, any of your customers' critical data, because that could mean damage to your company's reputation, or worse, it could mean a costly lawsuit. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Identifying potential risks is always unique to the environment that you have. If you have an email system that you're managing, that's going to be a different layer of security, nuance, and understanding than if you outsource that to letting it be a cloud managed provider. I would think that there's not a large group of us on the peninsula as business owners that are still running our own server system environments. But those that are have to have that additional layer of savvy, because when it comes to those public cloud services, they are implementing security on our behalf. And it's in those terms and conditions what they're providing and what they are liable for. And that can take a lot of relief off of small businesses' back. In fact, a lot of the information that we're going to talk about today, I'm bringing to you from a wonderful government organization, believe it or not, called the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, or CISA. And they're near and dear to my heart because I am a volunteer in a group that is working to secure our software supply chain, similarly to our hardware supply chain, where we want to know all of the ingredients in our food and we want to know all of the little pieces that go into making our physical equipment, our airplanes, our cars. We also want to know what individual pieces of software and code went into making the software platforms that we access and use today. Because if any part of that is insecure, we want to know, either secure it or just be aware of the risk so that we can monitor it. So I love being a part of that group and what we've produced, but they've also provided an enormous amount of information for small businesses. And some of this can seem a little more than small business, more targeted at the medium business. When you talk about CEOs that have an IT department that can create a security program manager, you're probably talking about an organization that's 50 to 250 employees. When we talk about most of the businesses on the peninsula, right, we're not that big. We're talking about 50 or 10 and under employees in many cases. So this can seem large, but you want to relate it to your business and think about it in a sense of how you would scale it to match your business and how you might apply some of these large concepts to the individual nuances of your small business. So you'll see here, it kind of breaks out some guidance based on, the leader of the business establishing a culture of security. And if you're watching this, you're probably a business leader or at least in a position of management where you're trying to understand the threat landscape and how to secure your business. So you're already taking the step to establish that culture by becoming knowledgeable and understanding what you need to share and create within your business. And that might mean that you're also the security program manager. That might not be the case. You might be able to identify someone within your organization instead, but they don't necessarily have to be the IT person. In fact, sometimes it's better if they're separated from the IT lead because sometimes as an IT lead, you can get really close to the systems that you use and support. And maybe one of those systems isn't as secure as your business would like it to be. Someone might need to guide that IT leader to picking a new product that's more easily secured. But ultimately, these roles are important. You need someone that understands the process, understands the importance of the business and how to drive it forward. And you need the IT or the technology lead person that's going to implement the security measures. So they have to be the person, like we talked about in the first class, that's sort of owning your technology environment and they're managing the different things that you're using throughout the business. Maybe that's you. Again, we're talking about small businesses that may not have the opportunity to have these roles broken out. You might be wearing all these hats yourself. So it can be hard to stay savvy on all of these topics. You might need to think about bringing in outside assistance, but we'll talk about what you can do to get a better grip on things and feel confident. So, yeah, we've talked about all these different applications that open different doors. You probably aren't using all of these platforms yet. You're probably not using every piece of technology that we've talked about in the last classes, but you are using technology in your business. And in order to identify what risks your business potentially faces, you need to know what technology, devices, processes, and people might be at risk. So we talked about process mapping and we talked about tracking your technology in the first meeting. So I'm bringing up here the technology tracking sheet that we provided in that first class, because this can be a good starting point for you. If you haven't been tracking the licensing that you're using throughout your organization or subscription services or different software products, starting here is going to give you that base. So you'll know things like what the products are, what departments are using them, and what people are using them if you're tracking this data. That's all part of what's building your digital landscape that you need to understand your threat landscape. Now, in addition to this, you'll also need to consider things like physical devices that you use. If you connect them to a network, or you use firewalls or other devices to manage your system, most of the devices that we use today, even if we don't think about them as technology devices, they utilize software and they're potentially vulnerable. And believe it or not, this is going to include some things like vehicles, some tool systems, large scale power tools and equipment. Even lawnmowers now have software that needs to be updated. So there's different things to consider, but a good starting point should be the physical assets that you're tracking from a financial standpoint. um, you can go through your purchase histories, if you keep track of maintenance schedules. And then, of course, there's the technology tracking that we talked about. There's also the marketing and online presence tracking that we talked about in the second class. You can use that to find out the different, like your websites that are part of your threat landscape, your emails. Um, this goes back to mapping your communication process. You'll have details about that in there. We're adding this layer of technology knowledge to your business throughout all of these classes that's kind of needs to be brought together when we talk about security along with your physical asset information so that you can really map out what is critical to be secure. And that includes physical access, employees, if you have entry and exit procedures to your physical locations. In general, just your training and onboarding might be a good starting point to dig out information on what you're telling your employees to go access, how you're telling them to go get different information about their processes, you know, where you're storing that information, how it's accessed. This is where the threats are, because ultimately that's what they're going after. It's your information. So if you keep things like physical filing cabinets, you keep them locked, but who has the key? Where is the key stored? So if something happens to that person, you can still get to the key. You don't have to get a locksmith out. What about a safe? Who knows that combination? What if the only person that knows that combination is unfortunately no longer with us all of a sudden? These are also parts of your threat landscape because they are potential points where threats can attack you. If that person that has the combination is targeted, they can be lured to giving up that information. That's a phishing attack, and we'll talk about that. And it might not seem natural that you have to document these things as part of your risk. Like, having an office manager with a key to the cabinet that can only open it, that's limited the risk, right? Yes, it has limited the risk. But what happens when someone calls using artificial intelligence as your business owner and impersonates that office manager to open the door? That's all possible with today's technology. We're going to talk about those threats a little more, but consider every point where information can be accessed, where it can be stored, where the employees who have access to it are at risk. These are the things that define your threat landscape. And most important, if you are capturing any of your customers' data, if you're using things like point of sale, even their email addresses, name, phone number, if you're storing these in Outlook and you've opened a malicious email, you have brought a risk to all of those other email addresses. So you'll want to track that, make sure you understand what was the risk that I put them in, who did I put at risk. If you don't know these things, it could really sneak up on you. One of your customers could have had their bank account hacked because your email sent them a malicious link that they clicked on. And now they're going through the process of getting that, refunded or whatever. They're going through litigation and your business comes up. Even if you're not involved in the litigation, if it's exposed that your business put them at risk, that could keep new customers from coming, and you might lose some of your existing customers as well. So customer data ultimate need for protection. So why are businesses at risk? What are we at risk from? And this can be a hard one to explain because, if you're a sweet, innocent person out there and you don't want to cause harm to anyone else, you just want to run your business and have a good day and bring a smile to someone's face by, giving them a piece of cake or a lovely pastry. Hopefully your business makes lovely pastries because that just brings a smile to my face, especially if it's vegan. So why would I ever be at risk? Well, a lot of these malicious actors, they are just making broad strokes. They're looking for any business that they can potentially attack because they need something to pick up on. They're just looking for a hole. And if they find it, that's where they're going to exploit it. So they use some specific tools at their disposal. And the primary one that we see is malicious code. We also call this malware, but there's various classifications of what entails malicious code. We started to learn about this really as viruses. And viruses are applications that are executable in some way. It could be through a link in an email. It could be through a picture or an image or a video. There's a lot of ways that this malicious code can be transmitted. Viruses were really focused on destroying applications, shutting them down, or um, causing different problems. They're not necessarily built to capture data as much as malware, worms, and other types of malicious code are. Like keystroke tracking and applications that will capture your device's information, those are a little different. And there's things like Trojan horses that will completely destroy your network and equipment. So there's lots of different types of malicious code. They do require a level of sophistication. So there's some that you can just buy off the dark web. They're readily available to you as a malicious attacker out there. You know where to go shopping on the dark web for those things. And if your need is, relatively simple, like, oh, I just want to capture all the passwords that this person types in, there's tons of things for that. An application to crack your password isn't necessarily considered malicious code, but it's a malicious application used for malicious purposes. So, what we also see in businesses, and this is becoming more and more popular, but really on a large scale, and you've probably heard of this, it's called ransomware. So, ransomware is it's not a new concept, but we're seeing it more and more as businesses are all interconnected now, networked, and have their data available. The malicious attackers can take control of those systems through malicious code, phishing. When we talk about ransomware, it's really the purpose, not necessarily the type of tool used in the attack, but the purpose is to take control of your technology so that you can't use it until you pay a ransom, until you have provided them with whatever it is that they want. And ransomware is often asking for money, but we do see things that are more to victimize a specific organization. If you're a nonprofit that they have a specific target against, we're coming into a very political time right now. So there may be a number of ransomware attacks that are related to the nature of this political climate. But you've probably heard of outages at car manufacturers, power facilities, these physical operations. There's been things even at mining facilities that have caused material damage, malfunctions when loading cargo in different shipping companies. This ransomware, depending on its desired outcome, can wreak a lot of havoc. They're basically taking over your environment and shutting you out until they get what they want. But what do we see most commonly around here? Yeah, we see a lot of phishing around here, but not with an F, with a PH. So most scams, like a tech support scam where there's a pop-up that says, your computer has thousands of viruses, or we just got done with tax season. So there were tons of, the IRS needs you to immediately click on this link to file your taxes before it's too late. All of those kind of scams are phishing attempts. They're trying to get you to give them the information that they need to get to the critical data about you. So there's a lot of things you can look out for when it comes to phishing. And we're not just talking anymore about email. I'm going to mention here all the important things to look for in an email. The sender's email address looks suspicious. Instead of in tech support at amazon.com, it's tech support at 1234amazon.com. That's not really Amazon. It could be very generic. They're not using any greeting with your name, dear valued customer, or sir, ma'am. They're just creating a broad stroke. Again, they're avoiding specifics because they don't have them yet. They want you to give it to them. These could be spoofed hyperlinks or websites. So in the email, it says something, but when you hover over it before you click on it, you can see that the URL doesn't align with the business that you think it does, or the person that you think it does. So I avoid clicking on any email links unless I am 100% confident in that sender. Otherwise, I'm just going to type that address in the bar myself. There's nothing wrong with not clicking on the link in the email, but going directly to the site. And oftentimes, if that's not an option, if they're like, oh, this is some special link, you should be verbally talking to that person and knowing that this is a legitimate thing that you should be clicking on. Check for spelling. It seems like a silly thing, but a lot of these phishing emails will have misspelled words or grammar that just makes no sense because it's not really a human writing it. In a lot of cases, it's just an AI bot that they have writing these things now, and it's very easy for them to get set up. And attachments, attachments. Unless you are expecting someone to send you a specific attachment, or you always get a PDF every month with this bill and you know that it's safe, you should avoid email attachments. If they're from a generic newsletter that you get, if they're from your bank or other services, you should be highly, highly suspect of that attachment, because attachments are a quick way to get Trojan horses, viruses, a lot of those more dangerous malicious codes, and certainly ransomware, because just in order to download it and opening it, you are executing the malicious code of that application. So that's how you protect yourself from phishing emails. But there's also vishing now with a V, and that's voice phishing. So now you can actually receive calls from AI that sound like whoever you're expecting, that sound like your family, that sound like your boss. We recently even had a video vishing incident where a company finance manager thought that they were looking at a Zoom meeting of their customers. And the Zoom meeting was actually completely AI generated. So their CEO was in this AI generated call asking them to send money. And because it looked like their manager, it sounded like their manager, they went ahead and did that wire transfer. And unfortunately, it was not their business. And so getting that back is now, one of those struggles because they fell victim to phishing. And then we've also started having smishing. And smishing is just a fun way of saying SMS or text message phishing. I don't know about you, but I get a lot of these from different opportunities that I've applied for. I see them if I ever sign up for um, coupons or different things. I start to get an influx of texts that are, click here, sign up here. Da, da, da. No, avoid SMS texts if, linking an SMS text unless you know for sure. And then the smishing that's more concerning is when they're able to fake your friends and families' phone numbers. So you think the text is coming from one of your contacts, and that text might be asking you to send them money. That text might be asking you to provide them a password or a passcode or some kind of access, but this is not really them. So it's important to make sure that if there's something about that contact that doesn't seem right, that you're suspicious about it. And any call to action like that, you should be verifying. If someone's asking you to provide a password, send them money, any kind of critical piece of business information or data that they're trying to get from you, you should be suspicious. You should be thinking of ways to double check that. So now we've talked about the potential threats out there and how to understand your landscape. We're going to take a little pause here so that I can answer any questions that you might have, and we'll give everyone a chance to refresh their beverages. I'm also going to pause our Zoom recording for just a few moments. All right, so let's go ahead and get back into it now. Let's talk about how we can start to be more secure. And yeah, I know. It starts with passwords. Passwords, they can seem like a real headache, but they're used ubiquitously right now because they are easily implemented. They are a level of security and they're easily scalable. And it's just something that we already understand. Different technology security concepts that we're going to talk about today, they can require a level of technical savvy, but passwords don't. Passwords are understandable to pretty much everyone because they've been a part of our life for so long. And there are ways to do passwords better. We got to create strong passwords. We have to create long passwords. So I want to see passwords that are at least 18 characters. And that might sound like a lot, but this is what it takes to stay away from some of the less sophisticated attempts to crack your password. You want to use a mix of characters. You want to have some upper, some lower characters. You want to have numbers. You want to have symbols. Depending on the provider, some of them even let you include things like spaces. So making sure that you're taking advantage of whatever characters are available to you in password creation can give you a lot more options. Now, you're going to want to avoid common words, dates, names, especially your own name, your business name, you know, things like very specific, your location. A lot of people, they only update their passwords once a year. So that password always ends in a 24, 25. You want to avoid any of that common stuff because these malicious attackers are sophisticated enough to know that those are things that are commonly used. And to help you with this, think about your passwords like you would think about a phrase. And I've provided some fun ones here to take a look at that are just based off the beautiful place that we live. Here you have, Discovery Trail BP22. So, it's based on or LBP 22, yeah. So it's based on Discovery Trail, Long Beach Peninsula, and the number 22, and you've replaced your A with an @ symbol. Yeah, I mean, that's going to keep you relatively secure versus Discovery Trail, LB. You're giving it a little extra here, and it's 18 characters long. You have capitals and lower cases. It's sophisticated enough to give you that password layer of protection. And remember, passwords are just kind of your first layer of defense. They're like pawns on the chessboard. They're going out there, they're your defense. They've got their little shields on, but they're kind of easily trampled by any of the big attackers that really want to get to your data. So you have to think about them that way. You need them to be as strong as possible, but they're still just providing you that initial layer of access. You can use password managers to bring ease to this password process. Password managers are awesome. I can't tout their benefits enough, especially for a business, because having to write down a password and share it with your team is extremely dangerous. So, and not to mention, every time you update it, who needs access to that password? Now, you really shouldn't be sharing the same password with people because this comes down to identity. When you're sharing a password with multiple people, this means you're sharing the login. You're actually sharing that account. And I'm going to put on my legal terms and conditions hat again because this was such a huge part of my corporate work, was letting people know what those terms and conditions that you've agreed to when you signed up for that application actually mean. And I'm going to say 80-20 rule. Most of those accounts say that they are meant for a specific living human individual, and you have to be specific because many of those applications don't want you to use them on a server that multiple people can connect to or in an automated process. That means that you don't need the actual people logging in to use it. They want to know that it's one actual person. So things like these password managers, things like Adobe, things like Microsoft, and obvious things like your emails and Google accounts should be dedicated to one person. You can share emails. There's secure ways to do that, involving different inboxes where you don't necessarily have to share the same password, but you can be configured to view the same mailbox. But that is one of the use cases to potentially have to share a password that's not necessarily against any terms and conditions. When you register an email for your domain, like mybusiness.com, and you have Lynn at mybusiness.com and Tom at mybusiness.com and info at mybusiness.com, and both Lynn and Tom have access to info at mybusiness.com, you're not violating any terms and conditions there. So you might have to share that password. And a password management application can enable you to do that without any friction and in an extremely secure fashion. You can also generate passwords with password managers. And I'll show you how I interact with my local password manager here, which I utilize LastPass. And I show you this now without typing anything in yet, because it isn't going to show you my passwords right off the bat. But I can type in things like Amazon, and you can see all the different Amazon accounts that I have to manage. And this is, I do Amazon shopping. I also use Amazon Web Services. I have an Amazon Prime Store card. These are all passwords that I've stored in the password manager. And if I want to access them, and I'm going to pick something that's, a little less critical. Let's see. I utilize my Fred Meyer app on my phone, and I utilize the Fred Meyer website. So I've replicated the password a couple times here. But let's say I want to go shopping at Friday's. I can just launch. I can click sign in. And thanks to LastPass, I just have to choose the account that I log in with, and it'll populate my password for me. Now, I didn't want it to say keep me signed in there. I wanted to uncheck that, but it did the auto login really quickly there. And then when I'm creating new accounts, I can utilize LastPass to generate secure passwords. I can tell it that I want those lowercase and uppercase numbers and randomized symbols. You can get more advanced with it if you decide to go with a paid account. It'll also provide you alerts that'll tell you if your passwords are safe or not. So if I utilize the same password on two websites, LastPass is going to tell me so that I don't do that because that's not secure. It should be one password per account. And here's where the password manager is really going to help you. You need to be updating them regularly. And by regularly, I mean ideally, you're updating them once a quarter. I almost feel like it's beneficial to update them more than once a quarter. I feel like if you have very sensitive data, you should probably be updating them once a month if you can. But at minimum, 90 days is considered a general rule of thumb. And you can set up LastPass or your other password manager application to tell you, hey, it's time to go update this password. Go log in with your existing password, go change your password, update LastPass. It can take you just 2 minutes per account. Now, if you're like me and you have like 100 or 200 some accounts, it's still a chunk of time, but it's worth it. For the security, it's worth it. And I showed you LastPass. That's not the only game in town. If you look at your information sheet that I provided, I've also given you some information on other password managers here. 1Password, Dashlane, Keeper, NordPass, they each have different benefits and different costs associated with them. They almost all include basic usage for free so that you can get to know them and decide which one you really feel comfortable with. Like LastPass, I just happened to use it at my last company, so I became very familiar with it. It's easy to navigate and manage, and it scales as my business scales. So if I need to add users, I only pay for the users that I need, and I can add more users at any time. All of them have similar functionality. Some are part of larger security suites that will provide you other tools and functionality. LastPass offers things like an authenticator, which we're going to talk about in the MFA section coming up here. They also include a VPN. NordPass and Dashlane also offer VPNs, or what's called virtual private networks. And this is another way to access data securely when you're on a Wi-Fi network that maybe you don't trust, or if you have remote workers. We'll talk more about that later. So I think that if you're managing your business, you need a password manager in order to be efficient using it. And it's not just something that I use on the computer. I have LastPass on my phone. It is a lifesaver. On my phone, not only is my phone locked with my fingerprint and password, but LastPass also, in addition to verifying my master password, which is the only password that I actually have to remember, thanks to LastPass. I can unlock apps. I can store things like credit card information, any type of secure data detail, not necessarily documents or images, like some secure vaulting services you utilize now that have password management also include things like keeping a copy of your ID or passport. There are varying levels of sophistication of password managers and secure vaults. So depending on your needs, you can get really detailed. And some of these are definitely geared towards businesses, whereas others, 1Password has like family sharing. They're more geared towards family members. But LastPass, Dashlane and NordPass, they have business plans that are focused on different business needs. So I'd give them a try if you're even at all leery about it, because yeah, it is somewhere else you're storing your passwords. But all of these services, and I'm most familiar with LastPass, but all of these services have unique ways of storing and encrypting your password data that makes it inaccessible to the malicious attackers. And that's not something that you're going to get from Microsoft, Google, or Apple. So, yes, most of us have at one time utilized password storage in a browser. For a lot of us, it was the first way that we saw storing passwords. I've been using a desktop password manager for a long time prior to cloud-based password management, because storing passwords in your browser is a huge risk. Your browser is your like biggest threat point on your PC or Mac. You're browsing sites that are dangerous. You're opening files, you're looking at videos, images. That browser code is also well known to the malicious attackers because they're all over. Everybody's using these browsers. It's not like an app that maybe is geared towards your specific industry or small business. Everybody's using these. So, of course, this is the first place that those malicious attackers are going to go. There are some use cases for these, the security tools provided by these companies, not necessarily browser-based password management, but using their authentication apps can be an additional layer of security that we're going to talk about later. Both Microsoft, Google, and Apple offer what are called our authenticator apps that are native to your phones. So those are a secure use case for it. I really highly recommend avoiding using things like the iCloud keychain and syncing your Chrome account across devices with your password stored in it. It's just one of those really dangerous areas because this is not encrypted. It's not secured in, a proprietary code like LastPass or the other applications. But of course, you do have to manage your password manager. You have to use it consistently. So it's not going to help you gain efficiency. It's not going to create security if you're not using it. So many people are like, well, I use it for this and this, but not for this and this. Well, that's an inconsistency. It's a difficult, if something goes wrong, do you know which process it went wrong in? With the password manager, you want it to have multi-factor authentication. You're trusting this application to store all of your passwords. You don't want it to be secured by just your master password. You want another layer of protection. Like I said, that's just your pawn. You need a bishop and a knight. You need some defense too. So you also have to update that master password. Now, if you're only remembering one password, it's a lot easier to update every quarter than having to remember 15, 20 different passwords that you're updating every quarter. You use your master password to get into LastPass, and then you use the the creating of the secure passwords and the launch to launch into all the apps that you have stored in your vault, update those passwords with new randomly generated passwords. So again, you don't need to remember and know any of those passwords really, because it's going to create secure ones and it's going to store them for you. Don't forget your master password. If you're not on a paid account for any of these services, you will lose all the passwords and data that you stored. And you might be going, Lynn, like that's crazy. I don't want to use a password application. If there's any risk that I can lose all of my passwords, well, you're not really losing your passwords, right? You're just going to have to go reset them. It's not a tragedy if you lose access to your password management system, unless you don't remember how to get to things, or you lose access to your email, which there should always be backup ways to get to. And the great thing about these password managers in a lot of cases with multi-factor authentication and different forms of password management, you can also store things like backup codes, security questions, and different things that you are part of that password and security process. A lot of these offer you the ability to export backups. Now, the backups are encrypted, and you can only access them if you have access to the account and service. But taking that backup and moving it offline to USB stick means that at that point in time, you have that backup. It's not connected to the internet anymore. It's not at risk anymore unless someone gets the USB drive, which you're going to keep in a locked drawer, and you're going to store in your password manager who has access to the locked drawer. We're talking about that threat landscape, right? So making backups can be a great safety net in case of emergencies or a case of loss of that access, or for some reason if the service becomes inaccessible. So you want to watch out though for phishing attempts. If once you sign up for a password service, you might see a spoof email that looks like it's coming from LastPass and says, there's an issue with your account. Click here to reset your master password. Don't do it. Don't click on it. Stop. That is one way that they can then get access to anything that you stored in that vault. So you want to make sure that you're going to the app, you're going to the website directly. You're not clicking on links from your password. You're savvy, you're aware That's the first step to becoming more secure. And of course, don't reuse your master password. It should be dedicated to being your master password for the password safe. And like I said, if it's the only password you need to remember and you're updating it every quarter, it shouldn't be hard not to reuse it because you're just going to come up with a new phrase relevant to that point in time or that application that you're using. So we've talked a little bit already, but let's talk about using authenticators. So does this frustrate you when you have to get a text message on your phone and then enter in a 6-digit code in order to get access to your bank account? It shouldn't. It should make you feel like a warm blanket is wrapped around you because that means not only do you have a pawn with your password to your account, but now you've also got a knight ready to defend you because if somebody comes in and tries to attack and they don't have that MFA code that's randomly generated just at that login point, they can't get in. And there's a lot, multi-factor authentication is a broad term. It represents a lot of different ways of adding another layer to the login. So it means things like the SMS code that we talked about. It also means using things like a mobile authentication app. Let me see how well I can show you this on my phone here. But I have the Google Authenticator app on my phone. And I can show you this because this is just showing the different accounts that I have. And here, let me stop the screen share so I make sure that you see this. So it's just showing you the different accounts that I use and this code. And then you see this little bar ticking away because, oh, they're all going to update. So unless you already know my password and you're attempting to log in at this moment in time, this code will only be valid until that time runs out. So that's an additional layer of security that is unique to that point in time, unique to that login. That's a warm blanket. That's making me feel good, right? So don't get frustrated by it. Get comfortable with it. Feel like this is one of the best ways that I can add an additional layer of security to what I am trying to access. And, these multi-factor authentication should be used as much as possible. I did mention that we're going to dig into how to set up MFA or two-factor authentication on your Gmail account if you have not already done so. So this is a good time to take a look at that, I think. We don't need to go shopping in Fred Meyer. So this link is included in your worksheet. This is the Google support site, so you can find it by typing in two-step verification. Do you want to log into your Google account and go to the security panel? And this should take me here. Now, again, you're not going to see my password because I have it in LastPass. And all I have to do is click on it. And I already have two-step verification set up on one phone, but it also allows me to set it up on a backup phone if I need to. It will look different if this wasn't set up already, where you'd have to enter in your phone information. And you can also, manage your recovery phone here, which you want to make sure you have set up if you don't want to lose permanent access to your Gmail. But I think they did make this a requirement not that long ago. So see, it's very simple and you can add other things. So this is embarrassing. Look, I haven't updated this password in almost a year now. Boy, I really should do that. But I have a recovery email. I have questions. I have a Google prompt that will come up on my devices. And this is a good point too. You want to manage these devices. So if you'll notice, I added this phone 2,340 days ago because it was my phone prior to the phone that I got 149 days ago. So I want to go manage these devices. And this is something that I encourage you all to do is to go and look at what devices are associated with your Gmail account. So I'm using this Windows computer with Google Chrome right now. It knows that's me. Now here's my inactive device where I had applications. So we want to sign out. This means that if for some reason I didn't wipe that device before I sent it off to be destroyed and someone managed to get into it, even though I had a password and thumbprint security on it, now it's not signed into my Gmail account anymore. Now I also have different Macs. This one's been inactive for a long time, so I might want to go ahead and sign out of that. Anything that's inactive and, doesn't look right now. Here's an unknown device that's trying to access and signed on to my Drive for Desktop account in November of 21. So I'm going to go ahead and sign out of that. I left all this mess here so that you guys could see it during this session so that I have something to show you. I'm joking, really. Unfortunately, I haven't looked at this in nearly long enough. So this is another way that you can be proactive about making sure that your Gmail account, your Google account, has not been used on devices that you have not authorized or that you do not have control of. But make sure you set up this two-step verification process. There's lots of different ways that you can use the verification using the Google prompts, the Smart Lock app, and it gives you information on how to use all of those and how using things like security keys, which are little USB devices. There's all kinds of different ways that your device can be extra secured in your account data. Let's talk about the new popular guy on the street, the biometrics. So as you saw me using my phone here, so I'm going to open the LastPass app and it's not looking at me. So look, it's not actually opening. It's looking for my thumbprint and my face before it opens on my device. That's a form of biometric security. A thumbprint, your irises. There's even different types of biometrics that can track how you type, um, things that scan handprints for physical biometric security. This data on your biometrics is also something to consider at risk. It is collecting data about your face, hands, fingerprint, whatever it may be that you're using the biometric for. So you do want to consider that account, that Google account in the case of your phone or Apple iOS, me, whatever they're calling it today on the Apple side, that account, those have your biometric data. In many cases, they also have your voice and video and image data because they're all in here. So that looking on my Gmail account to see what devices had accessed my account, those types of portals are available for your iOS accounts, for your Microsoft accounts, even things like if you have an Adobe subscription, you can log into your account to see if other people have been logging into your account and where usually an IP address or location they've been logging in on. So you want to know if these accounts have potentially been hacked that have biometric data, because then your biometric data could be at risk. And that's another thing that you want to be aware of is, okay, if I was using thumbprint security for my Google account and my Google account itself was hacked, I probably want to switch to a different method other than fingerprint to secure my account moving forward because my fingerprint is potentially at risk. So this is why what we're going to talk about later, having an incident response template to track your potential incidents is important so you can understand when that incident happened, what was put at risk, what should I change based on what has now been put at risk. But in general, biometrics are, a lifesaver. There's something that's unique to you and not as easily replicated. Though things are getting more sophisticated with AI and voice and images and the different things that they'll be able to do to replicate the different biometrics. In general, you'd have to be very directly targeted for that level of sophistication. We're not seeing broad strokes of very sophisticated attacks. What you see are, kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of sloppy broad stroke attacks where they're sending you emails with misspellings and URLs and things that people that are even a little savvy now should be aware of. But when it comes to being directly targeted, that's where this more savviness and the more complex security devices and services need to be implemented. Wi-Fi. Seems like we've all grown to need this like we needed a bottle when we were babies. Like we can't live if the Wi-Fi isn't working. Our businesses can't run if we're not able to connect all of our devices, and cabling was expensive. So Wi-Fi became extremely relevant because it was easily accessible, it was less expensive, and it made you wire free to connect to the internet. So Wi-Fi, great thing, but it's also the biggest threat, right? So if you have a Wi-Fi network that you manage for your business, you are responsible for managing that network, not Spectrum. Whether they tell you that or not, they are not managing your Wi-Fi network. In many cases, they're leaving you with a default password. They're leaving it open for other devices to connect as long as they have that default password, which is also not usually a very long or complex password. But they're also leaving it on broadcast mode. They're not implementing any of the enhanced features. So it's your responsibility to do these things. It's not hard to do. But if you drive down Long Beach with your Wi-Fi on, you will see dozens of Spectrum 2, Spectrum 5, AT&T, any of those standard providers. And I actually don't know if I've seen any Starlink Wi-Fi opens, but this means when you see those, you basically know that it was installed, set up, and forgotten about. So if you're even a little bit savvy, it's not hard to break into those systems. And if you haven't changed the default login, some of those are set to admin as the name or user as the name, and the password is something like let me in or admin or 12345. Like it is that simple because they're expecting you to set that equipment up. They're not expecting you to just leave it in its default stance forever. Not that your technician may have clearly explained it when they installed it, but You are responsible for that. And they do make it easy. You can even update your Wi-Fi password from the Spectrum app once you've set that up to connect to your device directly. I highly recommend, unless you have a specific reason, don't let your Wi-Fi network be searchable, right? Your neighbors don't need to know what your Wi-Fi network is called. You know what it's called and you can connect to it unless you have a device that requires that you search for the other devices, which does happen. You can leave this set and all of your devices, once they connect, they know how to connect. They don't need it to be broadcast in order to connect to it. Now, the other thing that you can do that I highly recommend, unless you have a reason, once all of your devices are connected, you can stop your network from allowing other connections. So it will remember your computer, your phone, your printer, even if it's not on all the time, because it's assigned them an IP address. It knows the MAC address of the device. It knows this information enough that it can reconnect without it being broadcast and with all the other devices that have never connected to your network being blocked. So if you're a business that has to have available guest access, like the Long Beach Welcome Center, where I happen to volunteer on Sundays. If you're ever bored and would like some information on what we have on this beautiful peninsula, stop in and see me sometime. But there, we want to provide Wi-Fi access to tourists or the local business owners as they may need when they're looking for something in our community. So what we could have there is a dedicated guest network that's separated from any of the back end business network requirements of the Welcome Center. And that means it has a different network name. It's not Spectrum, whatever, it's guest at Long Beach Merchants. The password is different, and we're allowing other devices to access it. Now, we could put other restrictions on the traffic that goes through that router, depending on the sophistication of your Wi-Fi router, modem combination, whatever device you happen to have. You can restrict certain URLs from being accessed. If you know of a malicious site, you want to put it on that list to make sure it's always blocked. Some of these will allow you to put adult blocks on there so that sensitive sites can't be accessed. This is some of the tools used by the public library and school system to keep kids from looking at things that are too grown up for them. If you have a guest network, you might want to do things like that too. Or maybe you want to get really complex with it and require that they actually create an account before they can use your Wi-Fi. You see this with a lot of hotels that maybe provide a low-end Wi-Fi connection for any guest, but provide a higher end connection for a guest that pays for Wi-Fi. It's associated in those larger hotels with those rewards, uh, programs where you have to log into your rewards program in order to access the Wi-Fi. That's also providing them a level of security. Not only do they now know the IP address and the MAC address of your device that you were connecting to their network, they know your name, so they know your email, whatever information they required for you to create an account to access their Wi-Fi. And you, as a location owner, as the Wi-Fi controller, can do that too. Now, what if you're not the owner of the Wi-Fi that you need to use, or you're on a public Wi-Fi network? You want to avoid doing anything with critical or sensitive data while you're on those public networks. Try to avoid logging into banking services, anything related to the back end of your business. your customers' data, your employees' data, those highly critical pieces of information that you could be financially liable for. You don't want to access those on a public network unless you have additional layers of security available to you. And one of those that we talked about were virtual private networks. And virtual private networks, or VPNs, can create their own encapsulated environment that your system is solely accessing and protected. Now, this can mean that you can't necessarily access things outside of that virtual network, depending on how secure that network is made. Some people may be familiar with using VPNs during COVID to connect to their remote working environment. And if you need remote workers, you probably need a VPN to support them, because then you can limit when a user is connected to that VPN, what else they can connect to on their network. And this can prevent you from allowing in threats to the data that you're allowing connection to through that VPN. With VPNs coupled with firewalls and different networks of security sophistication, you can create a very stacked, protected environment that makes it incredibly hard for a malicious actor to go from so and so gave me their password to I've gotten all the way to the customer data that so and so's company manages. So the more layers, the better. And let's talk a little bit about physical security. And first, we're going to start with physical technology security devices. I mentioned USB keys, and the Google site mentioned USB keys. So, USB authenticator keys can be sophisticated enough to include biometrics, or they could be just simple key code generators, where that USB authenticator, when it's plugged in and gets a powered connection, it generates a code that then allows that device to connect to the network. We can also use technology to access physical systems, right? We can use key card entry systems like after hours access at the library, which I highly recommend getting so that you can access all of the wonderful resources at our Ocean Park Timberland Library when it's off hours. It's such an amazing benefit that we have here in this community. I love it. But there's also physical biometric scanners. I remember using one of these back in 2004, where you slid your hand in to little up against little posts and you set it down. And it was basically looking at different points on your hand to clock you in for your job. It seems like a simple thing, but if that's what you put in front of your door and your door doesn't unlock until the right handprints are on it, that's a pretty sophisticated level of security. It's something that's more difficult for a malicious attacker to get access to than, say, a key code that someone might slip up and leave a post-it note on their desk that has the key code to the door written on it. It's definitely these biometrics, retinal scanners, thumbprint scanners, they can provide a layer of security to your physical environments that it's so much more, like I said, than having a key code or a key. And these are things that you can easily scale when you have more employees. Whereas, if I got to make a key every time I get a new employee, that's a cost every time I get a new employee. And I don't know who's actually coming in with the key unless I already have a security camera, which you might, and then you can relate the time, but you might not be able to do that very easily if you don't have anything but a security camera. Maybe if you had a security camera and a door sensor, then you could tell when the door was unlocked with the key and look on the camera. You've added an additional layer of security through technology. And door sensors, there are motion sensors, there are sound sensors, there are for data centers, there are really fun sensors that will detect temperature, detect moisture, things that are dangerous to the computer environments for different reasons, but can also mean that a threat has entered your secure area. So there are lots of ways we can bring cybersecurity and physical security together, but we also want to make sure that we're creating backups when these environments are implemented. Because if that biometric door locking system doesn't detect your hand, you have to have an alternate way to securely enter that facility, or someone that's managing that facility that's able to override the system or correct an error that might be happening with your particular handprint. You want to make sure that for as secure you're making everything, you're also keeping in mind when that security may fail. And this is all part of incident tracking that we're going to talk about as well, because anytime there's unauthorized access, that is an incident. Not, nothing may have happened when that unauthorized access happened, but what you don't know, you don't know. And months down the line, you find out, well, during that unauthorized access, a couple of paper files with customer data were stolen. And now those customers have had their identities stolen. They've pinpointed it to your data on them. And now all of a sudden, your reputation is on the line. You're potentially facing litigation. So when we're layering up on security, there is a concept in the physical world of offline security, right? So now in the world of AI, where we don't know if a voice is a voice and a face is a face, we need additional pieces of data. What can we do? Well, we can make it a little old school. We can go back in time a little bit. And, what did we used to do? Well, we used to have safe words, passphrases. Shocking. We used to talk to each other face to face, live in person. And I do suggest that for your critical employees, um, on a personal level, for your friends and family, creating safe words or verbal passphrases with each other when you happen to be in person, because you don't want to do this over email or text, because now that safe word is at risk too. But in order to prepare for those threats, make this a point of, in your monthly employee meetings. Hey, everybody, this month's passcode, in case you get a suspicious call, is the bread is stale, And so, oh, I just got a call from my manager and they're trying to alert me that there's a customer that needs us to do an immediate refund. So I need to cash out and send this, go get a gift card that we can give to the customer. There's all kinds of crazy things that these fishers will try to get you to do. So you're listening to this and you say, okay, boss, what's this month's passcode? That attacker just got shut down hard. They don't know what to do now because you've created an impasse. You've created something that, unless they are privy to your special passcode, they're not going to get by you. AI is not going to know that in your meeting you all talked about this together, or when you have your one-on-ones with your manager every month, you give an updated code, or on family holidays you all talk about, oh, until Easter, Christmas's special code is the snow melted. and it could be things that you already know about each other. Let's say you're facing an issue and you haven't created a special passcode. One thing that you can keep in mind is you should know something about that person that an attacker can't just figure out. You don't want to go with anything that this person posts on Facebook or that's normally accessible, like an email address or a physical address. These are things that can more easily be captured in a broad stroke attack. You want this to be something like, where did we first meet? Or what year did I start with the company? Who hired me? What do we do every month in order to keep the frosty machine working? It's something unique to your business that this person you're talking to should know, but that someone not really connected to your business will know. Never feel panicked when you get one of these calls. I don't think before the advent of cybersecurity and other malicious phishing attacks that people really got a lot of calls from their grandchildren saying they were in jail and needed money to be sent to them immediately. So it seems crazy to me that we have all of these grandparents that are just ready to send off iTunes gift cards like it's nothing all of a sudden, because I don't feel like when I was a kid and all you had were payphones, that this was really happening all the time. Like my grandparents thinking that they were going to get a call from me in jail, like I don't think that ever would have crossed their mind, even though I wasn't exactly the tamest of children. But nonetheless, you want to think about these offline methods of adding extra layers of security. And these are more like your queen, right? Queen is going to go around that chessboard just crushing it because there's no way the attackers can get around some of these things. All right, so now we talked about different ways that we can secure our businesses with passwords, implementing multi-factor forms of authentication, protecting our Wi-Fi, implementing things like VPNs and firewalls when we need secure data accessed, and of course, how to create offline and physical security layers. So I'm going to take another stop here for any questions that you might have. And I'm going to pause the recording. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back. Sorry there, I was muted for a few moments. So we're going to talk now about incident response planning. And I've brought up here our incident response spreadsheet that I provided as part of the class, with just some minimum elements that you want to start capturing as you're becoming more aware of security breaches and other incidents that happen to your organization. So at minimum, these are the things that you should be capturing. And we're going to talk about what they mean and why. So here we have date reported and date occurred. Now, you might be thinking, well, wait, what's the difference? Well, if you think about when you find out about most data breaches, it's not the day that it happens. Sometimes it's massive, like the AT&T data breach, and we're all made aware pretty quickly, but it still wasn't the moment it happened. So you want to record when it was reported or when it was discovered and when it actually occurred. So in the case of your bank, they might send you a letter and you got that letter today, but they're telling you that the data breach happened last year. So you want to capture that data because then any issues that arose with your identity between the date of the actual that date occurred and the date reported, you may be able to go after the bank if anything occurred to your identity during that period. And most likely, they're going to be providing you identity protection services because of this. Then you want to track the incident type. And here I have an example of a malware infection, but you might have unauthorized access to a physical building, even to, someone opened my email, and I know that because I went into my Gmail account and I saw that there was a device in there that wasn't mine. So I can see the date that that occurred, and I can note that today is the day that I'm reporting it and that it's an unauthorized type of incident. It could be a virus. It could be a phishing attempt where you got an email that was attempting to ask you for your password. You also want to track this incident even if it wasn't successful, because you might think it wasn't successful, but then something could happen after the fact and you find out that it was a multi-layered attack and you only caught one part of that attack. So then you want to describe it. And in this case, we're saying the employee reported suspicious pop-ups and a slowdown on their workstation. And we discovered it was infected with malware. And you're just going to explain in as much detail as possible what the incident was that occurred. The impact level. And this varies depending on this employee. If this was the CEO, it may be a high impact versus someone that runs the point of sale system that's more of a medium impact versus an HR employee that might be a high impact. Depending on the type of attack, the point of attack, the target of the attack, you're going to have to determine for your business what level of impact you feel that that is. Now here we've listed the response team. So let's talk a little bit about people. As we're working on our incident response plan, we need to know all of the people involved in managing our incidents. So that can be your employees that are involved in the process of finding the incidents, tracking the incidents, you as the owner or CEO being responsible for those incidents, but also the employees impacted, affected, attacked, anyone in that incident process. You want to understand what their role is, what their responsibility is, how they are a part of that process. This may also include your vendors. If you have outsourced security services, those are part of your incident response plan. It may be that the vendor is the one you're getting the security notifications from. So from your bank is involved in that incident. You need context there. You have partners in business that you work with. And of course, customers and how they're involved, how they're contacted, how you communicate with them if there is a threat. You want to think about not just your focus, your business, your employee, but all of the people interconnected with your business as well. So how do we identify and classify those incidents? I mentioned and we showed the first one was malware. And that's going to be very common. You get those pop-ups, all of a sudden the system's not running right, things seem hokey. Maybe all of a sudden you can't open your browser, or it's always opening to the same page, or you're getting those flashes that say, contact technical support or whatever. You probably have some kind of malware going on, and that malware may not be doing any harm right now. It may be waiting to be connected to something, maybe waiting for you to input a password, but it's there. And that's the type of incident that you classify that as. So phishing attempts or vishing attempts or smishing attempts, like we talked about, anytime someone tries to get data from you, your employees, or from your customers through your website domain or email, if you're um, on the opposite side of the phishing, where it looks like the phishing is coming from you, you've probably already been attacked. So you want to document any of these phishing attempts to get that data, because you may think that you didn't give them any data, or you may think it was not really an incident, but it's what can come out of it in the future that you don't know yet. Another type of incident that we see a lot is data breach. So this is some form of information that's critical to the business was accessed without authorization to do so. This data may have been taken off of the system it's supposed to be on, or maybe it was just viewed. But if that data was accessible to someone who is not supposed to have it, it was breached. So that is a highly critical form of incident classification. Lost a device. You may have lost your phone. And guess what? You were accessing all of your business data from your phone. You'd had your biometric data. It had your email on it. It had pictures from the business. You were accessing documents. There are all kinds of things that can happen when you lose a device. This is an incident you definitely want to keep track of as you start to recover from that lost device. You want to know what date you lost it and what was involved in the recovery, so that if anything happens, you understand that it was from that breach and what you can do. So any kind of unauthorized access, someone got into the building that wasn't supposed to get into the building. That's an incident you want to track. So right now we're just talking about, in your incident response report, how you classify those incident types, how you describe them, and how you might determine their impact to your business. And we talked about the people, and then you want to document what you did to contain that issue. So in the case of a malware infection, you immediately disconnect that device from the network. You got to stop the bleed. Something has attacked that device. It may or may not have ongoing access. You want to pull that cord as quickly as you can and make sure that that device is not still on your network, or connected to a public Wi-Fi or internet, because that's just the ability for them to continue to access that malicious code, either to gain the data that they want or cause the system damage that they want. So in this case, we disconnected it from the network. We performed an antivirus scan and a malware removal. So now we've cleaned that device off. We're confident it can go back to the network and not be a threat. And then we want to put a summary of our investigation. We looked into this malware variant that was detected. It exploited a software vulnerability. We're getting a little detailed here, and you may not know, like, how do I find out if this is a security vulnerability that's important to my business? There are different ways you can find out, and I'll show you one a little bit later in the call if we have the possibility. But you want to, you know, list here what you did to investigate that incident. And this can also be finding out the scope of the attack. What data you found was actually involved in a data breach, how that person got physically into the building without a key. You want to put that investigation summary and also what you feel the root cause of that incident was. And this gets a little complex in a corporate world when you're talking about software infection because some companies, when they provide you software, are a little hesitant to provide the root cause analysis because it could come down to our software developers wrote poor code and that allowed the attacker to access this piece of software and add their malicious code so that it stole your identity information. And companies that develop software aren't really keen on losing their reputation either. So sometimes getting to the root cause can be difficult. But if you think about the different types of breaches that we talked about, you want to try as much as possible to come to the root cause because that's where you can develop your remediation plan for. So here we had a root cause that we had an unpatched security flaw in the vulnerable software that allowed this malware to execute. So our remediation plan says patch the vulnerable software on all systems. So make sure that none of the other systems have this same vulnerability. And then implement stricter email policies and user awareness training. And you could really tag this on to any kind of threat. You always want to follow up at the end by letting everyone know what happened, letting them know what you did to remediate, and training them on how to avoid it happening in the future. This is creating that tech savvy culture that we saw on the CISA website, where they were telling us, it's the role of the CEO here to establish a culture of security. So, creating this incident response plan, you also want to capture what lessons that you learned. Because at the end of the day, you want to know that you're growing from this process, you're improving your business, and you won't make the same mistakes of the past. So we learned that the importance of timely software patching and user training on identifying potential threats. In this case, the status is open because they haven't completed it. But if they've removed it from the network and fixed it, it's probably okay to say it's closed and add your closure date. So our incident response procedures, we're going to detect and assess the incident. So we figured out something happened. We're going to assess what's going on with it, what it's touching, what's going on. We want to notify all those stakeholders that we identified in our process that need to be notified. So if I need to notify my outsourced security professional that one of my employees has a computer that is just flashing. I can't get them to access any data on it anymore. I think it's been infected with a virus. You're going to reach out. You're going to notify them. You're going to notify your business owner that, hey, so and so's computer's down. I've notified the security company, but I'm letting you know because we might have a threat to the company and we're in the process of investigating. And as the security program manager, maybe you need to let other parts of the business know, like, hey, HR, we we don't want you to access your systems right now because one of the employees in your department has this issue. So we want to remove all access until we figure out what the issue is. You have to notify everyone what's going on in order to make sure that the process stays contained. Containment, number three, containment and mitigation strategies. This is what is going to keep that impact to your business as low as possible when these incidents happen. You also want to preserve the evidence of what occurred. So, this is especially important when you're talking about customer data breaches, financial data breaches, where you might want to go through some litigation if you can figure out who your attacker was. In order for your lawyers to win in those cases, they need evidence. And that means preserving as much as possible of the state of the attack and what happened. You want to have communication plans. So if an incident happens that you have to let staff know, have templates ready. An incident response template that has all of your employees ready to be notified and what they should do, their basic instructions when under attack. You also want to have plans for how you communicate with your customers, right? We don't want to leave them in the dark because of all things, the worst case scenario is that something is happening to you and you don't know. So there's nothing that you can do about it. Now, if you notify your customers that potentially their email addresses and phone numbers have been exposed, you're still investigating the situation and you will keep them notified. Now they know that they should immediately go change their email passwords because they could be at risk. So you've helped them to contain and limit the impact to them by having a clear communication plan. You don't want to leave any of your employees, your partners, your customers in the dark about these processes because it could mean worse impacts. And, it may seem like, oh, I don't want my customers to know that I'm under attack or that we've potentially put their data at risk. But not knowing is worse because worse things can happen. And of course, then, you want to work through the recovery and restoration of the system. Whatever's been affected, if something has been taken, you want to try to get it back if possible, restore the affected systems if possible. Hopefully, you don't have to replace them depending on the attack. And then, of course, we have our lessons learned in our incident response so that we don't make these same mistakes twice. But none of this matters if no one knows about it. It may seem like the last thing that your employees feel like going through is security training, incident response management training, however you word it to the employees. But not only do you want to train them on what they could potentially be attacked by, but you do want to train them on how to understand these incidents and respond to them. The more savvy your employees are, the safer you're going to be. If you let your employees go through the free training that's available, and there is education available all over. I'm going to look at some of the links that I've provided you here in your worksheet. Again, I mentioned all of these links on the CISA website. They're just amazing, and all the way to what is cybersecurity. And there's even a video here that I've given you the link for that is on the CISA YouTube page. And we're going to go through in a little bit in the next session, but they have a wonderful channel here, and you can direct your employees to look through these videos. And there are some that are, on very basics. And then there are some that get to be in a lot more detail. A lot of the topics that we've covered here today are available from CISA to help you understand. And some of them are funny. So, I recommend taking a look, and directing your employees here. They do have some specific topics that they cover. They have some events. You'll notice I was a part of some of these SBOM events. That's our software bill of materials, which is a tool in our arsenal to protect our software supply chain. But here you have information on securing small and medium-sized businesses. There's just a lot of wonderful devices. I was reading the topic there, but there's just a lot of wonderful information here on their site that you can go through to help you understand how to be as secure as possible, up to and including active shooter preparedness. So I've also included an interesting PDF related to physical security that you can print out and give to your employees. But it's about this hello or oh no process that implies that you can follow these steps to avoid physical danger. And, this starts with observing. So if you're running a small business and maybe you have a store and you have open Wi-Fi in your store, and you notice that someone is just kind of sitting outside your store on their computer. They look up when people walk in. They're watching what people are doing in the store. They're maybe watching you. They're looking around at the security cameras. So they're maybe on your Wi-Fi, they're loitering at a location, without a reason really. Doesn't seem like they're eating, drinking, or conversing with anybody, and this can be, a little dicey, but that's why they say go initiate a hello. And in our world where we've all fallen into our cell phones and we can't dig our faces out, this might seem like a crazy concept, right? To say hello or how can I help you? Or, I was just curious if there's anything you needed. You want to be polite and light about it. You don't want them to feel like you're immediately suspicious of them, like you're on the attack. Um, so they say, do this to engage these individuals. But approaching a person viewed as suspicious does have potential risks. Certainly, in some of these situations where you're working alone, you may not want to leave your station and go approach this person. Um, but in that case, you may want to see if there's a way that you can dig deeper. Um, do they seem to be like asking weird questions? Do you feel like they're threatening in any way? So use your best judgment. But this is a really interesting set of guidelines to help your employees um, understand that taking a simple step of engaging with someone can potentially throw them off of being an actual threat. And this isn't necessarily geared towards people trying to lurk on your Wi-Fi, like I mentioned, and maybe steal your company data or potentially perform some of those Wi-Fi attacks. And CISA has another site on securing wireless networks that I encourage you to look at because it helps you to understand all of the different ways that you're under risk when you're connected to Wi-Fi, and certainly the risks you want to be aware of as anyone that manages Wi-Fi. There may be some of these attacks that you're not aware of, but when we talk about that physical lurker in your physical business that's, glancing over people's shoulders while they're working on their mobile devices or watching you as you go into the back supply room and looking at what you're entering into a key code. Um, you can implement different things to prevent these. So they give you different options to say, like for unauthorized computer access, when it's not needed, disable things like sharing. This can be more complex when we talk about documents and things stored in public cloud environments. But, of course, it even goes through, theft of mobile devices and what that means. And of course, all of the things that we've talked about today on your wireless network, changing your default password, restricting access, encrypting data. There's all these things that we've talked about that can make your Wi-Fi more secure for you, your customers, your employees. But again, if you are not actively training your employees, they aren't going to know. I'm sorry that the slides went back. So you want to create a culture of ongoing training. And, for a lot of companies, there's annual training that has to happen for many topics. Um, Different process handling procedures, or certainly when we're talking about sexual harassment or other workplace policies. These are things that you have to make sure your employees are refreshed on a regular basis. And you want to document what you're training your employees on, when they're being trained, so that if these incidents do occur, you can understand, was this a gap in the training? Did I never cover this topic with employees? Maybe I trained them on it, but it went over their heads. Or maybe I didn't provide enough detail. Or maybe this employee simply didn't pay attention to the training and I need to work harder with this particular employee. In order to keep yourself as secure from litigation as possible, you're going to want to document and maintain records on all of your employee training, on not only avoiding incidents, but the incident response training, and really any of your regular employee training. I'd encourage you to maintain tracking of. Um, it helps in so many different ways. I understand as we've gone through 4 of these classes now, and you have a stack of spreadsheets that you're thinking, oh, how do I keep up with this? When you implement utilizing data tools like Power BI, Tableau, other data analytics platforms, even just within Microsoft Office or Google Sheets, you might be able to connect these data points in ways that help you understand, I spend this much time in training my employees on security, and I spend this much time on implementing tools that make us more secure. So I need to plan next year this much in my budget to be as secure as possible. It can give you a lot of different insights. I am the data girl. I love capturing as much data as possible within the business. So, especially data around your technology, the more you capture, the more confident you'll feel in these processes and the less likely to react poorly when an incident does arise. So let's take another, 5-minute break here before we dig into our last section on maintaining software security and enabling remote work. I will let you ask any questions that you might have. Feel free to drop those in the chat or unmute if you have anything you'd like to ask. All right. Welcome back. Well, for this last section of our session, I decided to stand up because I get really excited about software security. And it sounds like a goofy thing, but when you're a girl like me who worked at two software development companies for the last 20 years, it's a little close to my heart. What I was responsible for at most of these companies was not cybersecurity, but the management of the software tools that went into the creation, the development of the software that they sold to their customers. So I got to work with a lot of fun nerds developing software that, sat at computers all day typing code. But, all of them were focused on their particular task. So when it came to making sure that the code that they were writing was as secure as possible, that it utilized third party code like open source safely and legally, because there's a lot of license requirements around when you're actually reselling software that includes some of these free and open source products in it. It's not so free when you're intending to make money on it. But developers aren't interested in that. They're interested in writing software code that creates new and exciting features and entices people to use their applications. Most of them want to be on that bleeding edge. And what do I mean by bleeding edge? So you've heard of the cutting edge. Cutting edge technology today is AI and cryptocurrency and virtual reality. Those are cutting edge things. So the things that just released now. But bleeding edge things are the technology concepts that are even newer than that. So when you talk about like home robotics, where you actually have robots in the home with artificial intelligence, that's more on the bleeding edge of the current artificial intelligence technologies that we have. And some things like NFTs, and we're going to talk about some of these bleeding edge technologies in our next session. So I encourage you to register for the next session. Um, you know, all of these bleeding edge technologies still utilize software code. And so keeping that code secure in these new and exciting environments isn't always the first thing that the developers are thinking about. And maybe no one's thought about how to secure exactly the environment that you've created. One of the challenges that I'm working on with the CISA volunteers is that artificial intelligence programs and applications, there are many different layers of code and data and connection that go into making those platforms. And if you want an accurate bill of materials for those applications, like say you wanted your chat GPT ingredients list, they can't give you that today, or they won't give you that today. They may have that data. It's probably not all pulled together. So it's really interesting that we've gone so far in the world of software and internet technologies, but we haven't really had this concept of bill of materials in the past. So that's a little bit why I am such a geek when it comes to software security. So how do you keep the software that you use safe? Well, first, I'm going to be that person that tells you you need to enable the automatic updates whenever possible. You may be saying, "Oh, Lynn, I know the woes of Patch Tuesday when Microsoft would release patches to their software and those eager network administrators would deploy it to production environments. And by production environments, I mean the actual active environments running your systems and data today. They would release those patches and Microsoft made mistakes. that took down entire networks in some cases. So you ideally have a process for testing in a staging environment if it's something critical. But when it comes to our mobile devices, SaaS services or software as a service where we're accessing things online, you want to let those automatic updates happen and know that there's most likely a way for you to roll back any of those issues that happened. Then you want to make sure that you're not using any end of life software. That's what EOL means, end of life. So I'm talking about if your company is still running a Windows 98 PC in the back to have everybody clock in and out of, you have a problem. You have a very end of life system there that can't be secured, can't be supported. It's it is a giant risk, even if you're not connecting it to the internet, which in some cases, some of that end of life stuff, I don't know how you're able to even connect it to the internet. But needless to say, if you're not updating your browsers, your email applications, if you're using Outlook or Thunderbird or any kind of installed desktop email application, you've got to keep it up to date. You've got to keep your operating system up to date first and foremost. Software vulnerabilities are very common for Windows devices and becoming more and more common for Apple devices because the malicious attackers know that that's what's running most of the systems in the world. Very recently, we had a broad scale threat to Linux environments that was exposed that makes many Linux systems at risk that people thought, I can rely on Linux. I can keep it safe and secure better than any other operating system. It's Windows that gets all these malicious problems. It's harder to execute code on Linux, but man, all of our critical applications that run things in our government or air traffic control or really infrastructure related services, many of these are running on Linux, so they're kind of a common threat landscape that most of these malicious attackers are going to be familiar with. You want to make sure that your operating system, your browser, your email application, any applications that you use really on your system at all, because you might have an application that's ancillary that you don't think is really important. It's like, oh, well, I use WhatsApp, but I only use it like once a year. So I leave it on my computer, but I don't really update it. I leave it on my mobile device, but I don't run the updates on the mobile device. Well, that's a way that a malicious attacker can get access to other applications and systems. So this is why it's so important to use supported, updated software. If you're using free applications, open source applications, you want to make sure that those applications are updated on some kind of a regular cadence. This is a lot of a gap when it comes to those applications. It may seem great. I found this open source developer made exactly the application that I needed and it's free. They haven't updated it in 3 years. That's a warning sign. That says that all the security threats that have potentially come out in the last 3 years, this piece of software could be vulnerable to. So you want to be really savvy about whether or not your software is updated and supported. Always visit vendor sites directly rather than clicking on advertisements or email links. We talked about this. This is should be second nature to us because you can't trust your email. You can trust when you go directly to the site. You know, I typed in the exact address. I know where I'm going. I'm not clicking on something that could potentially be spoofed or imitated. This last point can seem a little confusing. Avoid software updates while using untrusted networks. So why? Because they could push a malicious update. That's not really the update that you wanted. Or they could, you've initiated this process where the application knows that you're okay with it accessing it. That could be their doorway in. So, you really want to avoid doing anything that's system critical, data critical, or otherwise, should be done on a secure environment when you're on public Wi-Fi. And this also means when you're on guest Wi-Fi at another company. In a lot of cases, if that company is savvy, they will prevent you from doing this via their network rules because it could cause issues on their network as well. So it's just something to be aware of. Whenever you're doing changes to your system, you want to be on your network. And, new vulnerabilities are going to come out all the time. Your best defense is to be prepared. Have your software up to date. Have your passwords as strong as possible. Use MFA. Be aware and monitoring your environments. All of these layers add up to, at the end of the day, what creates a secure environment. So let's talk a little bit about enabling remote workers. So it can seem a little daunting if you're running everything on premise in your facility, to allow access to remote users to get to that data or to get to those systems. But we've talked about a layer of tools that you can use. Use a virtual private network. This will create an encrypted connection between that remote worker and your environment that only allows them to connect to the data that you want in a secure, encrypted fashion. They need a password, and if you set it up right, they need MFA or multi-factor authentication to actually log into that VPN. And any system that you manage, again, we talked about turn on that MFA. And this is going to be ubiquitous to many systems today where they have the ability to turn on two-factor, multi-factor, other forms of authentication. So you want to know what options are available to you and make sure that you've implemented the one that is most accessible and most secure for your environment. Provide them with secure devices. So there is a concept in the IT world of secure by design, devices that the government, CISA, feels are already secure enough that you can use them as an additional layer of security. I was going to see if I had that site up. I think it's this link, but so providing secure devices, that could include iPads, that could include Chromebooks, because these require multi-factor authentication just to access them. And they follow the rules that CISA has put in place for the development of their software. So you can look for devices that are listed as secure by design. You can also secure the devices with your company's preferences before you hand them out. Make sure that they have the right malware protection. Make sure that all their software is up to date. And most importantly, that only the software you want is installed. And let me go back for a second and let's talk about software in general. And I feel like I missed a note here, and maybe I'm stealing my thunder from a future slide. But first and foremost, if you don't need software on your device, when you get a new mobile device or you get a new laptop or computer, the first thing that you should do is remove anything from that device that you didn't really want. When you give workers new devices, don't give them devices that have software installed on it that you don't want them to use. Make sure it only has the software installed on it that's required for the business so that you know you can keep it secure and there aren't any other open threat vectors that you haven't considered. It can be a real hassle, especially with mobile devices, because they all come with apps installed that you probably don't need. But almost no one is thinking immediately when I get a device, I've got to uninstall all this stuff because then you have to run the updates for everything. And let me tell you, if you do the removing before you run the updates, it saves you a lot of time because all you have to update are the things that you left behind that you really need updated. You want to make sure, even if your remote employee is using their own device or what you call bring your own device, BYOD. So this became really kind of popular during COVID, where you maybe didn't have devices that your employees could use. You weren't ready. So you needed them to use their own home computers to access things. Well, what you may have forgotten about was to tell them how to secure their own home network. If their home network is at risk and then they're connecting your corporate device or they're connecting their personal device and then connecting to your network, that is a risk. If your Wi-Fi is perfectly safe in your office. There's no problems with it. You have it hidden. You only allow devices that you've allowed to connect to the network. It all seems good. But then the employee goes home and their network is being watched because they're a target. Then it doesn't matter how secure your office was because that data has gone with your employee. So they need to keep their home network secure, and it's kind of your responsibility to help them do that. You even want to make sure that they're using antivirus, anti malware software. I know a lot of businesses that won't let employees connect their home computers unless they know that the version of the antivirus, anti malware software installed on that employee's computer is up to date. And this is just one way to keep things extra secure. Of course, you have to provide them awareness training. So, especially if it's a remote worker and they need to be aware of how to secure their network, or they're not around other employees all the time to know that this email didn't really come from HR because HR doesn't ever send out these emails. I've talked to them in the office and they said they'd never do that. But I'm a remote worker. I've never seen these people in HR before. So I just clicked on the email. You want them to be as aware as possible of the threats that they could be under. The more education, the better. Send them to that CISA site, the Small Business Administration. There's resources on the Timberland Library site that they can do to train and make them aware of threats on social media and in other devices as well. So make training as available and make that culture of security as prevalent as possible when you have remote work situations. Make sure that the data that your remote employees are connecting and accessed to is backed up. If they are storing it on their local personal home computer, there's a problem. What happens to their personal computer when they're not working? it's being exposed to their personal malicious attackers. So you want to make sure that you have in process the knowledge that they need to know where to store those files, if you have accessible environments that they should be storing them in instead of on their local machines. And if it is something that does need to be stored locally, that there's a backup copy of it done offline where you know in case of emergency, we can go pull yesterday's backup or however regularly you need to do that in order to feel confident that under an attack, your business isn't going to lose data. And of course, if you have remote workers, having an incident response plan is even more critical. You have a whole other threat vector here going on with the remote working situation. So if you're not tracking the incidents, you're not understanding what you're exposed to, you could be increasing that risk. So definitely have an incident response plan. Having an incident response plan is so core to businesses that are looking to grow. So if maybe you're a small business today, but eventually you want to go public, this is part of that. You have to have a sophisticated cybersecurity stance, including incident response planning, before you go public because you're investors. And so this is pre-public too, right? You're looking for venture capital, you're looking for angel investors. They want to know that if there's an incident in your business, that you have a plan to respond to it and they're going to be notified of it in, whatever order you notify your business investors in of those risks. It's a requirement of publicly traded companies in their 10Ks to provide information on cybersecurity risks. And when you're attacked, there's a form called a 6K that you have to fill out if you're publicly traded. So there's not a lot of big publicly traded businesses on this particular call. So it's not a threat yet, but it's important to think about how these larger business concepts apply down to our smaller businesses and what we can do to become more like those large enterprises in the way we handle our incidents to prepare us to grow and to help us grow. As by implementing these measures, we as small business owners, we can protect our remote workforce, we can mitigate our risks, and we can make sure that all of that sensitive business data is as secure as possible. So I just wanted to touch lastly on automation and outsourcing concepts. So there's a lot of security processes that you can automate so that you don't have to think about it. Automating scanning of your network, automating reports on access to your network, automating backups, having those software updates automated. These are all points where you don't have to regularly touch them. You just need to know that they're going on, that they're happening. Even the incident reports, you can get the different parts of it, the reporting and closure dates with Power Automate, which is a Microsoft product. You could create an integration where if you get a certain email that says incident reported, that it creates an entry in your incident response form. Now I'm getting way out there as far as tech savviness goes because Power Automate is a more complex Microsoft tool, but you can create automations in a lot of different ways, some of them native in the applications that you have. And you want to be thinking about these points, right? Because we've gone through 4 courses now. There's a lot of applications for a business to manage. If you're on your own, this might be feeling pretty hefty right now. So anything that you can't automate, you might want to consider getting help with. And CISA will actually let you request a security assessment of your small business. Now, they do this for free, and they've done this for a little while, so I don't know how robust the offering is or how long it takes to get them to actually do your assessment because there's so many businesses in this world right now. So I'm not sure what kind of response the process is, but it's you just send them an email and tell them about your business, and they'll help you get set up with an assessment to tell you what your risks might be. But you might want to outsource your cybersecurity. Definitely consider if you're using any systems that you manage the physical hardware for in your building today that can potentially be moved to a cloud service. Move them to a cloud service. I know. If when I say this, a lot of business owners go a little nutty because we all thought that our networks were secure and we shouldn't trust public cloud environments. But believe it or not, when it comes to CISA and their guidance to small businesses, they said eliminate any of your on-premise systems that you can possibly eliminate. And this is kind of earth-shattering. That's why they put it in caps here, because for so long, the concern was that having things that were just open on the internet was a danger. So why has this changed? So eliminating the services that are hosted in your office, this means that you don't have to worry about securing those systems anymore. You have legal agreements with Google, with Microsoft, with the other service providers, whatever that application may be. Square, if it's your point of sale system, QuickBooks, if it's your financial management system, you had to agree to terms and conditions and what's called a SLA or a service level agreement when you signed up for those SaaS services. And they say that they will provide you with a certain level of security. So you've taken that burden of protecting a sophisticated system like email, like document management. Anytime you have secure data to consider having someone else be the bearer of the security burden for you. And what they're saying here too about secure by design devices, you know, it says here some organizations have migrated to only using Chromebooks and iPads when possible, right? Because you're removing the attack surface. These aren't running full operating systems. They can only run certain applications. They require multi-factor authentication to connect to. So they're providing that reduction of risk. And, get out of your comfort zone with outsourcing a little bit. Understand that it's not the worst thing in the world if you don't have control over everything, but you want to have the legal terms and condition in place to protect you as well. So again, I'm going to put back on my licensing cap and remind you to always read the terms and conditions of any service that you subscribe to anytime you purchase a piece of technology, so to say. You should understand all the elements of that, not just for the security purposes, but also for what you can legally do with that system. So, are there any other questions that I can answer today about securing your business? Well, then, since there are no other questions, I look forward to seeing you all again on May 8th when we're going to talk about that bleeding edge technology. We're going to talk about what's going on with artificial intelligence? What can you use it for to help your business? What risks does it bring into your business? What about virtual reality or augmented reality? Can my business utilize to keep up with the future? And should I be considering things like cryptocurrency? Blockchain technologies or NFTs. What could those bring to my business? Could those bring revenue streams or just more risks? We're going to talk about all of these fun and exciting technologies and what it might mean for your business. So I can't wait to see you there on May 8th. And I thank you so much for joining me today. Have a beautiful one. Don't worry about the rain. You know, the sun will be out soon tomorrow. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.